The Toronto Blue Jays are about to kick off their new season, and I'm here with Rob Longley, Toronto Sun sports columnist, to break it all down. Rob, what are the biggest storylines going into this season for the Toronto Blue Jays?
Well, there's a lot of them, Mark. They made the playoffs last year, so I think what everybody really wants to know is if this team can build upon that and have a little bit more success and go deeper into October than they did last year, where they were swept away in 2 games. Obviously, a lot of excitement surrounding this young team because of those accomplishments, but more so because of some of the offseason acquisitions, namely George Springer, the 2017 World Series MVP, a superstar with the Houston Astros for a number of years, and a guy brought in at big money, $150 million over 6 years, to help the young Blue Jays team along and take them over the top. So I think, if you're looking at the two biggest storylines, they would be that the young kids and how they're going to mix with a proven veteran superstar in Major League Baseball.
Rob, who do you think the biggest breakout star for the Jays is going to be this season?
I don't know if we can really call him a breakout star, but I'm really curious to see how Teoscar Hernandez does. I mean, this guy was the Blue Jays' best player last year. He was voted the team's MVP. He was one of the top home run hitters in all of Major League Baseball. He sort of came from the depths of where he was in 2019 when he really struggled. Yet nobody really wants to talk about him this spring. All people want to talk about is George Springer and Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette. But manager Charlie Montoyo told me recently that Teoscar Hernandez is going to be his cleanup hitter, and he's going to be number 4 in the order for a reason. The Blue Jays believe he's the best pure hitter on that ball club. So if he can build upon what he did last year, I think the sky's the limit for Teoscar Hernandez, and he could soon be seen as a superstar with another big season, and he could be the catalyst for this team going over the top.
You just mentioned Vlad Guerrero Jr. He lost a lot of weight in the offseason. What do you expect from Vlad this season?
Well, yeah, the reports are that he lost over 40 pounds. And if you look at the videos that he's posting on his social media accounts, it certainly seems to be the case. The two things I would expect from him, one would be that he's going to be a first baseman. The experiment they had with him at third base last year just didn't work. Part of it was fitness related, but part of it was he just wasn't natural over there. So I think with the weight loss, he's going to be at least an adequate first baseman. But I think where we're going to really see the difference with Vlad is I think we're going to see the hitter, the superstar that many people projected him to be when he was in the minors, a guy who can really hit for power and can hit for average and can drive in all kinds of runs. He showed us some signs of that during spring training. But if you look closer at his at-bats, what you saw was a guy who was getting around the baseball faster, which only stands to reason for a guy who's dropped that much weight. But the quick hands that sort of defined him on his way up into the major leagues are back again. And when you talk to people who are experts in the game, know far more about it than I do, they talk about Vlad Guerrero Jr. being a pure hitter. And if he's fit and his hand speed is like it was earlier in his career, he could have a mammoth campaign for the Blue Jays.
Earlier on, Rob, you talked about George Springer, the big offseason acquisition by the Toronto Blue Jays. What do you expect from Springer this year, as well as Marcus Semien, who was another big get for the Toronto Blue Jays?
Yeah, two big additions. Obviously, Springer, he's going to bring a little bit more stability in center field than Randall Grichuk brought. He's a better defender. He's not one of the top center fielders in the American League, but he's close. He's going to be a defensive stalwart out in center field. But mainly what you're bringing him in for is two other prime reasons. One is leadership, because he's been there. He's been to the World Series. He thrives on that big stage. He looks forward to October baseball, and I think he's going to be able to drag these kids along with him. But his presence at the plate is what the Blue Jays were really looking for. He's been a leadoff hitter through most of his career. He's hit more leadoff home runs than anybody in baseball over the last 3 or 4 seasons, and he's just a guy that can really spark that offense. And this offense is going to be very deep from top to bottom. But when you have a George Springer batting number 1 in the order and leading off, you're going to have a top-down, powerful lineup that's going to be hard to defend. So I think obviously he's proven that he can produce offensively, but I think he's going to help lead some of these young kids as well.
Rob, you just mentioned offense. What about the Jays pitching? I know the pitching was, a big concern, big question mark for the Jays in the offseason. What did they do on that front, and how do you project them on the pitching front?
Yeah, Mark, we joked about this earlier, you and I, that I think there's going to be a lot of 12-10 baseball games with this team this year. I mean, obviously they're going to be able to score a lot of runs, especially when they play early in the season at Dunedin, which is where they're going to start their home games. But pitching is the concern. I mean, they've got Yinjin Ryu, who is a proven ace in baseball, and it was an obvious need to get another starting pitcher during the off season, and they weren't able to do it for a number of reasons. There wasn't a whole lot of free agent starters that were available, and they spent all their money on Springer. Now they've got a bunch of guys. They feel they have some decent depth, so they've got six or seven guys that can start baseball games. But the question is, to what degree of competence will they be able to do it? Personally, I think we're going to see a decent year from Robbie Ray and perhaps a decent year from Steven Matz, two guys who had struggled over last year but have had good spring trainings with the Blue Jays pitching coach, Pete Walker, who's really good at getting a lot of the guys and sort of refining their games a little bit. But for me, I think one of the big keys for the starting rotation is whether Nate Pearson comes back and is healthy. He missed most of spring training with a mild groin injury, but so he's well behind heading into the season. But if by the end of the first month they can get him back starting baseball games, and if he can produce on the promise that he started to show last year and maybe be a solid number 2 guy, then this rotation has a chance of being at least competent and at least give that offense enough protection to win some games.
Okay, Rob, before I let you go, I mean, the question everybody's going to be wondering and wanting to know is your take. Where does this all net out for the team in the 2021 campaign?
Well, the answer to that question hinges on the previous one, I think. I mean, if they can get competent pitching, then I believe that this team has enough tools to at least be a playoff contender. Now, I've talked to a lot of people around the Blue Jays throughout spring training, and their message to me is, look, this isn't done. You know, we had a big off season, but we're still building here. So if they're anywhere near a playoff spot come the trade deadline in midsummer, they'll try to acquire a starting pitcher at that point, I think. But if not, they'll use next off season to do it. So while they're well along in this rebuild and there's tons of promise, they're not done yet. Having said all that, I don't. If you look at their competition in the American League East, I don't see why the Blue Jays couldn't be right up there with both the New York Yankees and the Tampa Bay Rays, who would tend to be the favorites going into the season, based purely on the offense that they have. And if they get competent pitching to back that up, I think they're a playoff contender.
Oh, Rob, am I going to get to see a game at Rogers Center this summer?
That's a good question. Right now, the answer is no. I mean, obviously, we have to defer to the border issues in this country. But there remains a fair bit of optimism at the corporate level with the Blue Jays that they're going to see some games at the Rogers Center at some point. My guess is they play home games in Dunedin until early to mid-June, when it becomes almost impossible to play games down there at that time of year with the rains that they get late in the day and the heat. And then they'll transition up to Buffalo, where they played in 2020, of course, and play there until they get the green light to come back to Canada. I think privately there's some in the Jays front office that are hoping that the Jays are in contention, and then you get games back in Toronto, maybe not in front of fans, but games back at the Rogers Center for a push to the playoffs. So whether that be some point in August or September on. And I think, who knows? We don't know what's going to happen with the vaccines in this country. We don't know what's going to happen with the border closures with the federal government. But I think if you're an optimist by nature, that you could see that as being a possibility, maybe some baseball at the Rogers Center by September.
Okay, thanks. For more of Rob's columns, check out the Toronto Sun. Thanks for taking the time, Rob. I can't wait for the season to start.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Thanks, Mark.